Recording. Okay, go for it.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining CNM today to hear about the findings from our sector snapshot. First of all, to all of you participating who took the time to answer the questions to the snapshot, particularly, especially the open-ended questions, we are very grateful for your time because it's provided us a lot of rich data that we can share back to the nonprofit sector. I just wanted to give a little bit of background of the snapshot. If you're new to it, CNM started this sector snapshot in 2009 to be able to collect information over time to understand the impact of the recession on the nonprofit sector in Southern California. And this year, we decided to customize the questions with a specific purpose of capturing the impact of COVID-19 on our sector. So 350 organizations of all budget sizes participated in this survey. That being said, it's a snapshot of our sector and wasn't designed to be a research study necessarily, but it does contain a lot of really amazing information. We'll be doing our best to answer questions as they come up in the course of Regina's presentation. So if you have specific questions, enter them in the chat and we will be able to respond. If you don't get your question answered today, you can always reach out to us and we can do a little bit more research, look into things, and provide you an answer. So with that, it's my pleasure to hand this over to our CEO, Regina Britzel.
All right, thank you, Christine, and great to see everybody. We always look forward to the sector snapshot every spring to get a sense of how you're doing inside your organization, with your team, with your funding, with your board, with the changes you're seeing in community need. And we're able to kind of line that up with the things that we're hearing from our clients and the people that come into our seminars and other information that we get from our peer groups. So happy to share, and not surprising to all of you, some of these insights and trends. If we asked the question in February, we would have gotten very different answers. We know that going into 2020, you were already in many cases in a fragile situation, but then the virus arrived. So just to give you a sense, as Christine talked about, you know, we started doing this snapshot in 2008 and 9 when we were looking at what's the impact of the recession on organizations? What are they seeing? And then how can we help? The alarming data point is that in the 2009 window in California, we had about a 12% unemployment rate, which always impacts both the state's budget because of income tax dollars, and it also impacts need that you're all seeing. And as of April, the unemployment rate right now is twice that. We know that whether you're a W-2 employee, a contractor, or undocumented, some of those jobs will not be coming back. And so that is going to impact some of our choices going forward. So with that sort of sober reminder, we were really curious about how you are dealing right now with the current environment, and then a little bit about what you're thinking about going forward. So let's dive in. So some themes that came up as we think about, you know, the good old days in early March. The ideas of, you know, we thought we were going into the spring with annual galas and runs and fund development strategies and budget planning for the new fiscal year. And within about 2 weeks, what we saw was you calling us saying, you know, I'm dealing with furloughs, I'm dealing with budget cuts, my event is canceled, we have to move everyone home, we don't have the resources to do that, or our programs can't move virtually, and now we have safety issues. Aside from the fact that there was trauma everywhere, worrying about the health of your staff, the health of your family, the health of the people that you serve, and then how to communicate what's going on just happened very quickly. Within about 3 weeks, the conversations moved to what can happen around some of the government grants that were coming through that were forgivable, some of the bridge loans, some of the recovery dollars that philanthropy put together quickly, local government put together quickly. There was just a lot of turmoil in figuring out whether or not you were able to access some of the Small Business Administration funding and who was going to be left out, what that was going to mean. And then back to how do we plan ahead and how do we respond to the growing needs of the people that we're seeing in our communities? And we know that the most vulnerable were hit the hardest. So with that, let's dig into some of what you told us. So as Christine mentioned, there were 350 of you, a little over, that number's still growing because some of you are still completing it. What's so great about this in terms of having a snapshot peek at what's happening across our region, we saw diverse missions, budget sizes, and geographic area. 90% of you are operating in LA County, but we really had trouble finding a mission that wasn't reflected in terms of health, education, safety, security, jobs, environment, arts and culture, diverse groups there. So basically what we wanted to find out, given the environment in 2020, what is your capacity to meet your mission and serve your community? And then we are asking questions again. We just put out a survey last week to find out what you're thinking about returning to work. And then we'll be asking some questions and packaging that information that we will present at the 501 conference. Many of you who have attended before or had registered know that we should have been doing this next week on May 20th. We completely jettisoned that plan, moved it all virtual. It's going to be 3 mornings, the first week in June on the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. And we've revamped the content to respond to the current crisis and the urgent and difficult decisions that you have to make. So let's take a look at what you've told us. A little bit about who responded, just to show you that it was pretty evenly distributed around budget size. So what we wanted to discover is how you were adapting your programs, how you were delivering services, how you were operating, what was happening financially with government dollars, individual giving, philanthropic dollars, how that was sort of what was happening to your bottom line, including your reserves, and then what was happening with your workforce, and then the impact of going remotely. So plenty to mine, and as Christine said, we had probably asked you for about 20 minutes or so of your time to help us understand what's happening there. So, you know, not surprising, when we asked how much of you have been impacted by everything that's happening, about 86% of you said, of course, we're all being impacted. But then when we asked about changing program models to respond to community needs, 74% of you, and this was mid-April, said that you had made those adjustments. 26% of you, and that's been pretty consistent, said no, we're pretty much staying the same. 50% of you said that you had already made program cuts and cuts to capacity on the service side. That's shifting as we got further away from who did and did not get PPP and some of the what's been happening since around being notified about some of the funding changes. And then 20% of you have been talking to us, and it's pretty consistent with what you said at the time, that you were really looking at shutting down operations and beginning to think about what assets you had that you might want to share with others, some talent that you have, some programs that you might be able to be absorbed by other organizations. All right, So some of the factors that are contributing to an organization's ability to adapt and your capacity to adapt is really how well staff can work together and adjust. The growing importance that internal communications and clear lines of accountability play, so that's sort of structural strength and sturdiness. Timely communication with external stakeholders and supporters, collaboration with partner organizations so you're not feeling like you have to do it all yourself, services and programs that were able to pivot, in some cases grow, in some cases sort of reconfigure yourselves, and others to take a pause, to realign revenue and expenses very fast. We saw a lot of scenario planning, you know, sort of probable and possible budgets, really looking at, you know, how do you plan as things are changing almost daily. And then the degree to which organizations had the capacity to cut services, respond to shortfalls on the revenue side, short-term and long-term, and then where you had some reserves that you could tap, some contracts in place that had some flexibility, all of that was relevant. What definitely emerged is if there were cracks before, they are huge now. So some of that fragility that we talked about going into 2020 and in, you know, in 2019 made it really hard for people to hang on in some cases when you couldn't deliver services in person and then couldn't be reimbursed. All right, so 64% of you said that there was a pretty quick impact on fee-for-service in that earned revenue side. Individual donor revenue, 51% said you felt that immediately. 40% of you told us that you saw reductions from foundations, and 23% of you said that you saw a negative impact on government funding, where what we heard pretty quickly is that there was a lot of communication, both in the sort of converting programmatic support to general operating support, and in some cases notification that we had hoped to support you, but now we can't because we're going to be diverting all of our money to COVID response. So for organizations that were very clearly aligned with homelessness, hunger, health, where it was a clear link to the pandemic, they seem to be having greater demand and a greater financial stability for right now. And in fact, new funding that came available in some cases. So the fee-for-service opportunities definitely were impacted by the safer at home requirements, where in some cases organizations could operate, and others it was impossible. Organizations with stronger kind of an individual development infrastructure had some stability. They probably went into this moment with better cash flow. Organizations with budgets over 20 million saw an increase in foundation support compared to the smaller organizations. We also saw organizations that were better positioned with their banks, had access to PPP loans, could respond more quickly to some of the money that was coming online, the forgivable grants, all of that. It really depended on relationships and access, which meant that some people were left behind that were working in vulnerable communities, smaller organizations, grassroots, you know, very concerned about the way that that actually impacts the sort of some of the optimism in the moment when we ask these questions, based on they were thinking they were going to get the PPP loans, and we know that many of those were unsuccessful. That information was not part of the survey. We just know that it came up afterwards. So the good news is that board members are feeling like if we were smart and gave them something to do, They are engaged and committed to this mission and wanted to step up. On the workforce trends, pretty quickly, absolutely a hiring freeze, absolutely eliminating. It was really a response to hold on to your cash. That staff raises were not a possibility for a third that said they're not anticipating doing, they're not anticipating eliminating staff raises. But you know, this is volatile. It is changing. In May, we're expecting to see the revised budget coming out of the state, and we know from our clients that everyone's looking at, you know, cuts. And 20% told us that they were laying off staff, and that continues to be a trend. In some cases, it also meant that you were looking at furloughs to take a pause. And take advantage of the unemployment benefits that were available in California, and that bump up that came out of the federal government where people could financially stay whole for a while. There was also the family leave opportunity where organizations could, if your employees were impacted by the virus, either they needed to take care of their ill family member or needed to stay home for homeschooling, and wasn't available to work as much, there were some subsidies available, and organizations were really looking at how to reduce their expenses and try and take good care of their employees. So fundamental really was, fortunately, a lot of money came online quickly with unemployment. We spent a lot of time helping organizations try to figure out how to access unemployment, what the difference between layoffs and furloughs, what some of the reimbursable expenses were for employers, and trying to stay within, being sensitive to the pressures on both the economics of running an organization and the stresses on individuals that had so much going on. We also know that many of you had to keep working and serving your communities in place and couldn't stay home. So that whole, the skyrocketing concerns around safety and fear and anxiety and depression and all of the stuff that went along with this moment that we're in, and how organizations needed to pivot a bit to support the mental health needs of their employees, their staff, not just the people that they serve. What we know on the technology-dependent transitions required that teams had to really think. We got a lot of questions from management and leadership about, how do I do this now when I'm not seeing them? How do I have difficult conversations? How do I track and hold people accountable? Took a couple weeks for people to transition. The staff layoffs appear to be impacting organizations kind of regardless of budget size at this point. It's been pretty universal. And then larger budget size organizations granted staff temporary leave and access to state and federal benefits, family leave, reimbursable, all of that stuff that I just talked about. So 90% of you moved to remote work, and many of you mentioned to us that required new hardware, software to support virtual work. And that little asterisk there was how often you mentioned to us you weren't prepared for that budget item. There were some practical issues around digital security. There were practical issues around people not having workspace at home that was quiet where they could focus, or internet access, or laptops, or servers that could host a remote workforce. So definitely there were privacy concerns, there were hardware, software concerns, and then there were financial concerns. and definitely morale concerns and accountability and managing people and keeping teams morale and focus and all of that stuff. It's been very, very dynamic. So a couple of things that you're telling us, you've learned some things. In fact, there's been some silver linings in this, that you learned that some functions could actually work out fine remotely. There are some new opportunities emerging, and that, that they've improved systems for internal communication, developing new management skills, tracking, and what we know is that some of you won't go back to the old ways, that in some cases there's savings, there's efficiencies, obviously not in all cases, but many of you indicated that you had to train staff, improve how you prioritize, how you think together, how you work together. You know, just I think the big takeaway here is there were pressures on every part of our system. And then some of them will be good things that we can take away as we think about returning to work. So a couple of things. You're telling us that in some cases you're ready to transition pretty quickly in the next couple of weeks as, you know, the different levers flip at the state and county level, and as we all think about what it's going to take to return. So what you're telling us is many organizations are beginning to plan programmatically and then sort of practically to phase it in. How you're thinking about safety precautions, having hand sanitizers, agreements with employees not to come in if you have a fever, washing your hands, keeping a safe distance, putting up barriers, limiting access to clients, to the number of people in restrooms and break rooms, and having cleaning products near copy machines and any high traffic areas. You know, it's all over the map. So some of you are telling us you're ready now or you never stopped. Some of you have said that you're not prepared, can't afford to do all of the sort of safety precautions that will help to control the virus, that you're nervous about that and still thinking about that. And some of you feel like it'll take at least till the end of this calendar year to be back up and back in place. So we will keep you posted on what we hear about the trends, and we will also keep you posted on what we're hearing from the county in terms of their recommendations. Those are always on our website, but we also have our working lunch sessions to keep you up to date on not only the news, but also how to operationalize some of that and what we're hearing from our colleagues and our peers. Happy to share that with you during our lunch and learns on Fridays. The 501 conference, as I mentioned, is coming up June 2nd and 4th. We really hope that you take advantage of that. We're going to be talking about what we learned from the state budget, what we've seen in terms of operating trends in the nonprofit sector in Southern California. We're going to talk about how you think about cash flow differently, how you think about reimagining your role going forward, since we know everything's going to be stressed and stretched. And it might also be opportunities to really get inspired by some of the changes that we've seen that we never would have imagined at the beginning of 2020, as people loosen some of their expectations and maybe build trust in new ways with our funders, with our government, and with our clients. We've also clearly tried to respond, because so many of you are facing similar issues. We've made small group coaching and those problem solving sessions available. We want to encourage you to take advantage of those. We know that you need support. We know that you need access to information that you can trust. And we're committed to make sure that for now, those small group coaching sessions help with all of that. So I don't know if any questions have come up, Christine, if you guys feel like there's anything that I left off. That we know that you're going to be facing some difficult choices in the months ahead. And if there's anything that we can be asking of peers that would be useful to you, we absolutely want to do that. We also are open. If you have thoughts about things that you'd love to see at the conference, we'll do our best to try and adapt. We think this is a great time to improvise. There's no wrong answers. And so we're hoping that you know that you can email us and or send messages through the chat, and we'll do our best to respond. But for now, if there's questions, happy to answer them.
Yeah, please put your questions in the chat. Regina, I don't know if you had to hop off at 12:30 or not, but we can definitely stick around and answer questions on anything that we covered. And I know that Christine has all of the data from the sector snapshot available. So anything that we touched on that you had follow-up questions on, we can definitely dig a little deeper. Lawrence, looks like we got a question raising your hand.
I just want to know what hours that program is from June 2nd through 4th every day.
Great question.
It's mornings. Yeah, we set it up for 3 mornings. So set your calendars for 9 to noon, and there's information on our website.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I saw that Sherry was asking questions about our friend Sherry Bathurst from Kaiser. Good to see you. Sort of the message for funders, a couple of things. The most important probably is that flexibility is king. That the more flexibility that funders can give to organizations to respond to the needs as they absolutely change, the better. I think it's going to be really important that nonprofit organizations are honest with the people that are funding them about what they are and are not going to be able to do. And then hopefully that funders consider that, this is unprecedented. We're going to be looking at numbers that we haven't seen since the 1920s in terms of the devastation, and that we're all going to have to think outside of the box, and that maybe some of the expectations need to be loosened so that we can learn together and then take advantage of that and share. I think the challenge too, Sherry, is that I think it's hard for funders right now, and I know we've heard from so many organizations that if you're not responding to COVID in a way that funders, everyone struggled immediately in March and April to just respond. That meant that there wasn't a lot of room or dollars available if you weren't doing something that was so obvious, after school programs, arts and culture, some of the stuff that didn't seem to be linked to the immediate and growing crisis. So what we heard from a lot of organizations is, what is this going to mean to us as we try to bring communities back? We know that one of the keys to recovery is the nonprofit sector, bringing communities a sense of normalcy again and being able to offer programs to support that recovery. So it's time to be creative.
Seeing like 3 different questions that are all kind of about the same topic. Future of fundraising. Everything's going towards COVID right now. Both have a sense of like at what point that's going to shift, and kind of a pulse on individual donor fundraising right now versus foundation funders.
Well, the great news after any crisis is that donors step up for a little while, so don't waste this moment to tell your whoever's been supporting you and others why you matter, the difference you're making. In fact, even that it's going to be expensive to bring people back because you need to keep everyone safe, and that's not money that you budgeted for. So I think everyone appreciates that times are changing, and we've seen over the last 15 years a pretty consistent decline in individual giving. If you look at kind of the whole, the kind of attention goes to the bigger organizations and the bigger gifts. But for most of us operating in our sector, we've really seen individual giving decline. What we know is right now, dollars are flowing, and that won't last. So it's really important that if you ever did any sort of evaluation about your impact, get clear about your message and communicate why that matters. And if you're part of recovery, and the impact and the services you're going to provide, you should be communicating that with people and making it very easy for them to give. I'm a little nervous that, you know, as we talk to our friends on the corporate side and on the philanthropic side, you know, they are oversubscribed. You know, even the government dollars we saw, you know, just the demand was greater than the supply. So it's not going to get easier. It does mean that we have to think about what's essential and what could we stop doing, and then really be clear with government and philanthropy and the corporate sector about what you're going to accomplish that fits their needs. And then where you may not be able to fulfill some of those requirements because things are changing and you need to respond differently.
Another good question about return to work. Curious about issues of liability, given the governor's executive order in terms of staff returning to offices.
I wish I was an expert on that, and I'm not. I know it is a hot topic, and I know we're going to have to get some experts in to talk to you about that. I think it's kind of a work in progress, but a smart question to ask right now, but we'll get you that information. And most likely, I think not next week, but the following week, we'll be talking about this whole return to work when we know a little bit more about what the county's recommending.
Gotcha. Let's see, a couple more questions popping up. Jonathan mentioned he's worried that organizations don't have a specific, clear, you know, effort towards COVID. What about all of our arts organizations? How do they justify and argue their relevance to funders during this crisis?
It's hard, you know. In fact, we're having a big arts event later, I think it's in June, because arts organizations are just telling us it's just quiet out there. But the important role that arts and culture will play in the healing is just going to have to be highlighted. And there are people out there that want to support that, you know, the sort of creative opportunities and outlets to talk and communicate and to share and to be distracted and inspired. So, you know, those things are out there. I don't think it's going to be easy to compete with the crisis. I think we have to sort of be honest about that. But boy, you know, I'd say get serious about communicating with everyone about the difference that you're going to be making, and then make it easy on your website to say, give here, you know.
Yeah, I think one thing to mention on that too is that arts organizations might be a bit better positioned for individual donors right now. That we had a session last week that was talking about how to pivot your you know, fundraising event to go virtual, and our PR expert was saying that the best trend right now is having live streamed events. And they had an example of, you know, there would be a wine tasting gala event that they turned into getting a professional chef to come and talk about wine pairings on their stream. And I would say that arts organizations with access to, you know, performers and musicians and everything are probably in a better position to take advantage of that type of fundraising. And I've definitely been seeing that cropping up across social media a fair amount more. People that are, you know, doing live stream fundraising events, people that are figuring out how to get their performers together to record things that they can then share online.
You know, Aaron, I'm glad you brought that up, because we're hearing some pretty successful things happening out there on the virtual side. You know, the nice part for all of us that are used to planning events and hiring caterers and needing a florist or renting a room and all those things, you know, what donors really appreciate is that you've eliminated all those expenses, that those dollars are going directly to serve whatever cause that you're all about. So there are opportunities, and I've heard of some not always hitting the goal that they would have. I've heard, you know, a lot of sponsors are saying, go ahead, just keep my money, just do what you need to do. And that some donors are saying, great, now all the money goes to the cause. So don't dismiss that there are opportunities out there to have some fun, even bring people together. And I think to Christine's point earlier, you know, what we're really seeing is that people are really anxious and excited to get together around something positive. They want that sort of human connection.
Absolutely. Christine, you had messaged me. Would you share what you were just describing? Because I think that's an interesting point too.
Sure. A few participants talked about ways in which they're partnering across fields of service or coming together as collaboratives also to respond to the community in a more holistic way. And that might be one way that arts organizations continue to be involved in the essential services that are provided to support communities as they're dealing with the fallout of this. So it is an opportunity to think about your mission expansively and reach out to organizations that serve the same community or target population that you serve.
Yeah. Any more questions, please leave them in the chat. Don't want to take up too much of everyone's time, but appreciate this discussion. Let's see if there's anything else. There were some other questions just about virtual fundraising, which we touched on a little bit, but we've definitely seen a lot of live streaming has become a good go-to for virtual fundraising events. Definitely pulls on the question of where is your audience and how do you access them? It's great if they're on Facebook and you're on Facebook and everyone's already there, especially as they've added a bunch of new easy donation features that you can use in Instagram stories and adding a big donate button to live stream events and stuff like that. But know that that's also a little bit outside of some organizations' realms, or you may not have any audience on Facebook and it's all pretty email based.
Yeah, you know, Aaron, I think just to end on a positive note, I want us all to remember that this is also a great time to use your voice. You know, you are the content experts on what's happening in your community, you know, what's happening to achieve your mission, and to make sure that people understand what the challenges are and also what some of the opportunities to do things differently might be. And most likely, there's not a going back. There's a going forward that might benefit communities differently. And so to bring together any talent that you can to help you think about how to leverage the assets that you have, how to bring in partners that you maybe always wanted to work with but hadn't, to really think about all the different ways that your expertise could be used to help us all recover over the next few years. This is a time to get creative, and just to remember that in any emergency, the communities really do look to our sector to bring it back. They know they can count on us, and we know that that means that there's a lot of pressure on all of you to figure this stuff out. And we know that you know, it's going to be really important in this window that you take some breaks for you, do what's going to sustain you so that you're able to do this work and keep your team inspired and solve problems that are going to be tricky ones. So always glad to have these conversations on a Friday to remind you that it's a weekend coming up and you're allowed to do whatever works for you to take your brain away from this. Our friends in the County Department of Mental Health reminded us last week that it's essential that you do something that distracts you from all this stuff for your own mental health and recharging your batteries. And then hopefully we'll see you at some of our events. We're here to support you, and that is our mission. So with that, I'm glad that we could share this data with you. I hope you find that some of it sounded familiar. You're not alone. A lot of the things that you're staying up at night over are happening to others, and that we'll keep bringing peers together and we'll figure it out. So thank you all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Regina. And thank you, Christine, for compiling all that data. We'll be sharing around a recording, PowerPoint presentation, all that, so you don't got to worry about having missed anything. And yeah, as Regina said, have a great weekend. Hope everyone stays safe and healthy.
Thanks, Aaron.
All right. Bye-bye.